Okay. Here we are for our third discussion. We've read up through the end of chapter 2, and there's a lot to talk about today. Keeping an eye on to seeing if anyone else joins us, but I could probably just start again by throwing this open to anyone who feels like they really want to get the conversation started in any one place. There's a lot we talked about or that we read. Anyone want to start?
I have a thought. When I was reading this, I was kind of reminded of a quote that any sufficient advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which was by Arthur Clarke. And so it kind of made me think about how when he talks about astrology and the people that reject it, that it's kind of like, it seems magic because it's not understood. It's an advanced technology that hasn't been fully unfolded. So that was just an idea I had.
I like that idea. Yeah, what is obscured or in the darkness can sort of be made as into a taboo of some kind.
Right. And it's like a language that needs to be, you need to understand the language.
Yeah.
So if you don't understand the language, then you can't have a conversation.
That's a big problem. Yeah. It can be demystified, but at the same time, because we don't really truly, I would be surprised if any of us really knows how it works. There's always going to be a mystery about it.
Right. Yeah. And he said the way that most people who reject it haven't ever studied it. So, and I find that to be true also in my day-to-day life, that most of the people that reject it haven't even read a single book on astrology.
Yeah. Did you come to this to astrology as a skeptic, or were you somehow open to it before finding out?
I'm open to it. I've always been attracted to it, and I find meaning in it. So it works for me.
I'm puzzling over, I've been kind of listening to a lot of astrologers talk about astrology. People that I think a goodly number of them have worked with Rick Tarnas or know something of his work, but he says in here that it's not connected to the sun signs astrology, and they only use 10 of the planets, and I feel like I've not studied, but heard more about the kind of popular astrology, and I don't know how to pull it apart. I'm wondering if I'm getting stuff confused, and that it's going to be difficult to understand really what Rick is talking about, because I've heard all this other stuff about my sun signs and my, and garbled it all up. Like I threw it all in the same trash can, and now I got to sort through it and figure out what the meat of what Rick Tarnas is talking about. I mean, I don't know if anybody else is having that trouble, but.
Yeah, I feel the same way, actually, Katie. I feel like, do you remember when you were a kid, we had those it's like a little board, it was like a magnetic drawing, and it was just magnets underneath there, and then you would pull the strip up and it would all disappear. It's almost like we have to take all those old ideas and old concepts and just start all over,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a foundation there, but it almost seems to me that Tarnas, in the way he's gone about this, and it's taken years for him to develop. I mean, he's clearly a scholar in this area, and how he, in his own way, seems to almost have created a new language for us in the way he approaches it. And even some of the jargon that he uses over and over again, like multivalence and, participatory, and that's kind of laid the new groundwork for really this whole incredible surge in interest in astrology over the last 10 or 20 years, or how it's just sort of naturally growing, you know. So I think we're all learning together.
Yeah, well, I think that's his idea, that we all learn together too.
Mhm.
We all learn something from his hard work.
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of like how he talks about how a person becomes impelled on a hero's journey by stripping away whatever prior ideas you had and going through the adventure of, you know, new territory to come out transformed.
Yeah.
So
He seems to have done that himself in a way too, because he was also a skeptic, and how he describes how he kind of came around and learned by diving in himself. And I think that's what Jung did as well,
yeah,
you know.
Mhm.
So on some level, we all have to do that, I guess.
yeah, I found myself also a lot of times when I've cast judgment on something, it's served to me as a lesson to overcome. So I've become very careful with you know, what kind of judgments I place. You know, having teenage kids, you know, I've made some judgments on parenting that then got served to me. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, yeah. So when you become aware of this process, it's really interesting. I can see where he's going with the whole you know, to the two of making progress and declining into a no progress. You know, you have that pivotal moment where you can go either way.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, and I took some notes too. We are at a crossroads, you know.
In-
Some of my notes, she said something about the whole emergence, I guess, of depth psychology and spiritual transformation is needed to preserve civilization. Really, we really are at a crossroads. And that sort of reminded me of a book that I read years ago, and it was by Carl Jung. It was Modern Man in Search of a Soul.
Uh-huh.
And that's what brought to mind what this quote was, what he said. Like,
There's a quote from Jung. Is that the one you're referring to? That-
no, these are just from my notes from Cosmos and Psyche, but it reminded me of that Modern Man in Search of a Soul, which I haven't read in years, but I think it was similar, that, you know, the mess we've got ourselves in as a humanity, as a civilization.
Yeah, I can't like dig up the exact quote, but I know Tarnis quotes Jung here at some point. I think it's in this chapter 2, where he says that something like Jung stated this in the most uh, serious terms possible, that the survival of our species depends on our understanding of the deeper psychological things that are impelling us.
Right.
We felt, yeah, Jung took it, of course, very seriously.
Yeah.
Too, I think it's really imperative on us. I'm not sure how I'm trying to fit this into what we read in this chapter, but I think it's imperative to us to be able to imagine a world that still has humans in it, still has other animals in it, and is a better world, a more equitable world. I mean, we've got to be able to imagine it in order to get to it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to save humans, or we're not going to save humans and animals unless we do. And I think these archetypes, you know, the way we are learning to interact with these archetypes patterns of behavior will help us create, move ourselves into better humans. But I did a webinar with Chris Bache, who did the book. What was the name of that book?
There's one called Dark Night, Early Dawn.
Yeah, LSD and the Mind of the Universe. And a lot of that is stuff, a lot of what I just talked about is kind of from that book that he did too. But he started doing that from, his kind of nesting material was out of Esalen and Tarnas and Stan Groff.
Well, I'll maybe just jump in here while there's a pause to say I did make another one of those sheets where
Good.
I could pull that up. I made a sheet just like with a few of the summary things that came up in the chapter if we want to look at it.
I think that's a good idea. It might keep me focused.
Just to refresh. Let's see. Can you see it?
Yes.
Of course, this is not everything, but some things. If there's anything that anyone else, if this triggers something that you'd like to talk about, we could jump in somewhere here.
I hope it's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about the synchricity part. I don't know if this is off base, but back in 2007, I'm okay now, but my brother passed. He drowned, and I had a dream the night before that he drowned, and we had a long conversation. The next day, I got a call that he was missing, and we found out that he drowned in the ocean. So I thought that was really intense. And then I found out later when both my grandmas passed away, the fire alarm both went off at the same time as their death. And I thought about them in those instances. And later I was told they passed away around the same time I had those happen to me. So I found that kind of interesting.
That is,
Yeah.
sorry, I mean, that sounds terrible. And then also it does seem to speak to the profound nature of how these things sometimes come through. And he says it, I think in somewhere in this chapter, during times of birth, death, major crises. Like, I think also he talks of near-death experiences as having sometimes being moments when we're shown something that can lead us to a new outlook. But certainly it came through in powerful and difficult way.
Yeah, that.
Right. Yeah, I think that that makes me wonder a little bit. That was something I took note of, is how come some people are more tuned to it? Some people seem to be more aware and open to messages like that. And other people are so much more dismissive and even almost rude about it when the topic comes up. So that's always been something I wonder about, like, why is there that variation in human experience, where that was really intense what you experienced. Not everyone seems to be aware of that or have that happen. I don't know.
I thought it was really odd. My sister said she had the same dream, not exact, but we both had similar dreams about water and our brother. It was really strange.
Wow.
Well,
yeah, and then it makes you wonder, like, why are you getting the heads up? Like, I know a lot of whys that we can't answer, but it's yeah.
Well, it certainly seems to be a gift that you have, to me.
It does feel that way. I wasn't hurt by it. I was kind of relieved because that was my closure, I guess.
I'm interested also, you had mentioned, that these sorts of moments often happen at critical times in people's lives, like birth or death or weddings or divorces, and I've had a number of really intense experiences like that as well. But in my case, I notice it seems to be cyclical. I mean, I'm old enough that I've been through this like at least 4 times now. And after a while, I thought, oh, it seems to happen every 7 or 8 years. So that's what really intrigued me too. And then it lasts for a few weeks, and then I'm sort of back to normal, whatever that is. But while these things are happening, it's just uncanny. I mean, it just blows you away. It's amazing. And I know there has to be meaning to it, but I haven't been bright enough to figure it all out, I guess. It has had the effect of turning me inward to examine my own behavior and my lifestyle, or, at what point I am in life and stuff. So it has had a positive impact on changes. It's just a very intense experience to go through. So I'm interested from the point of transits, actually.
Yeah.
Because, of what happening like that. And I haven't explored that, but as soon as I little bit more about astrology, I'll try to dive into that. I'm also interested in the astrology of families and relationships. So I'd like to take my natal chart and my mother's and my grandmother's and other people, because I've noticed similarities between my chart and my daughter's chart. So, I can't help wondering if there's some things are hereditary or,
I've also looked at that a lot. I've looked at my charts, my children's charts, my parents' charts, and I've been able to see a lot of similarities in there and each other's charts. So for example, when my daughter broke her back, she's fine. She recovered, had surgery. It was in my chart, Wow. So, and I've had a lot of children, not to get personal, but like Uranus is in my 5th house. And so I've attributed that a little bit to a lot of shocking kind of sudden events in my children's lives. So I'm really fascinated by that too. Familiar family charts.
Yeah.
I just had a reading done by Patrick Watson, and he looked it up for me when my brother passed, and Pisces was transiting or something like that. And it made me think of water. And I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
Let's see, there's a few people that so far I think haven't jumped in. Any of the people?
Hey, Deborah.
Deborah, Pia, Norma, any one of you, something that you particularly were like grappling with from chapter 2?
Grappling with?
Or just want to talk through or something?
Hi. I wouldn't say
Pia.
grappling with. I have been wondering about patterns in the past, that do seem to have cyclical things. I am not well versed in astrology, and that's one of the things that I am looking to this book club for. I did study with Richard Tarnas, but that was from the view of Jungian psychology, and I was fascinated by the book Cosmos and Psyche and everything that he did share with us in the classes, but I was not versed in astrology. So this is something completely new to me. But I did open up to an astrologer recently, somebody who was in the group, about patterns, things that have been cyclical, and they do seem to come in the numbers of 3, 7, or 9, which I think is very interesting. And I seem to be in a transit right now of enormous shift and change, and I'm curious about that too. I don't like to be determinative, but this is what's happening out there in the sky, therefore this is what's happening in my life. But I do notice that things are happening in my life, and then I look to the sky. It's sort of a reverse kind of way of looking at it. I don't like that determinism. It makes me uncomfortable. But when I am in shift, and then I look up and I say, oh, isn't that interesting too, that these things are in alignment or in conjunct or opposition. I find that very fascinating. I'm very happy to be here in this group. And as somebody just mentioned, I'm old enough to have noticed a pattern. That's all.
Mhm.
To be here. And I'm not puzzled. I'm not puzzled. I'm fascinated. I'm not puzzled. I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
That's enough. And I'm concerned about the political scene that is happening right now. And I don't know if that's like a taboo subject. So I just want to say that that's really in the forefront of my mind, is what's happening on the global scene and what that has to do with what Tarnas has been talking about. Because this is 2022 and this was written in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we're even allowed to talk about that, or if that's uncomfortable, or if anybody wants to share on that.
I think we can, I think we will for sure talk about politics, because it's all throughout this book.
Yeah.
I would say he's not someone who's like wearing his politics on his sleeve too much, Richard Tarnas, but you can tell where more or less where his sympathies are. But when you're talking about the global picture, you're speaking, I assume, about the war in
Ukraine
mostly. And yeah, I mean, well, we will, maybe it's jumping the gun a little bit to talk about some of these things now. We will get to it. Do you say you've already read through Cosmos and Psyche once completely, or is this the first?
Yeah, that was several years ago, and I'm reading it afresh, and I read it as a historical and psychological book, not as astrological, because I didn't know anything about astrology. Now I'm coming at it from a different angle.
Yeah, I think because some of us haven't got there yet, but I think we will certainly be getting there with Saturn Pluto, which is the 5th chapter. And he really details these pivotal crisis turning points, particularly in the 20th century. They just kind of pop out one after another with the quadrature alignments of Saturn and Pluto when they're in their 4 alignment. We're just at the tail end, you could say, of this most recent conjunction, but a lot of things have happened during these few years that are incredibly conspicuously seemingly displaying these qualities of Saturn and Pluto in combination, often in compromise formations or problematic formations. I think with Russia also, he touches on Saturn Uranus. It doesn't get a full chapter of attention from him in this book, but he touches on it with Russia, and I think it's really interesting. He talks about, in a way, Russia being a country that was sort of forged, an identity kind of forged with, well, from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and looking at how Saturn and Uranus this seemingly contradictory energy and polarized energy has been pretty important throughout the development of Russia. And he talks about things like their communism being a way to like firmly keep people liberated, or people can be emancipated by following the orders of the state, or this kind of combination of Uranus being a seemingly freeing quality, but only if it's bound to a really submissive Saturn quality. And the Russian revolutions in the early 20th century, both I think hit on Saturn Uranus hard aspects. Marx and Engels were born during a Saturn Uranus hard aspect. They then brought in their ideas about communism during a period of a Saturn Pluto conjunction. I think also I could be getting myself a little bit confused, but there's a lot of Saturn Uranus tension, I think, in the Russian character, according to Tarnas. And we're now in a Saturn Uranus square, and that's kind of one of the biggest overarching alignments of this moment. So we'll get into that more later, I think, but I think for me, Saturn Uranus seems to have a connection with like pivotal turning points in Russian history. And then as far as the overall global crises, Saturn Pluto has been very conspicuous, and we're still like at the tail end of that, you might say. It's at like 20 degrees now, so it's you might say it's past, but my understanding though is that a lot of the development of this idea to invade Ukraine for Putin was formed during this period of these few years of like him just dwelling on this way he wanted to take over this country in a very taken by force, not taken as a retaliation, but just sort of taken.
Mm.
But those are some thoughts. Well, we can get into that more as we get into the specifics. What do you, did some of that strike a chord? Is that what you're thinking about, or is it something different than that?
No. You know, I think what I'm enjoying about this class is that, I mean, I call it a class because for me it is like an educational forum. What I'm enjoying about it is looking at the macrocosm, not just the microcosm. And what I sort of shied away from in astrology before was the very personal. Just like, what is my love chart? What's happening in my home life? And yes, those are all very important things, but somehow when I look at it from a macrocosmic thing, it bears more weight to me. That's just me. I don't know about anybody else, but that's just me. So I'm really enjoying reading this again and trying to look at the larger picture, not just my little village, just the larger picture. So I really am so glad to be here, and thank you, Tim.
Well, we're glad to have you.
This was a 6-month-old.
How did I do this? Oh, yeah. Well, he's sleeping well now, so I have some time at night, and I got a head start. I read the book. I read it.
Several times.
It's just kind of sitting on this idea for a while, waiting for
Yeah.
Changing of the Gods.
Yeah.
Out. I will say though, on Changing of the Gods, I think I heard Kenny Ausubel say one thing he was looking for when he first found Cosmos and Psyche was he was talking to someone who said Ausubel was saying he'd like to find a book about astrology that is focused more on the we and the me.
Yeah.
Just like what you're saying, like he wanted to get beyond this personal focus on the self and say, is there one that talks about us as a collective?
Yeah.
And that's how Cosmos and Psyche was recommended to him.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Now, did you see the Changing of the Gods? Yeah, I thought so, but I wanted to double check. And because you weren't familiar with astrology, did you think that helps if you've read the book already? Did you think that sort of put it in a different perspective? Because he was really talking about the macro.
Absolutely. And I had the privilege of studying with Richard Tarnas at Pacifica Graduate 10 years ago. And I heard him speak about all of these alignments and so on, but he was coming at it from a Jungian perspective, which was what I was studying at the time. The emphasis was not on astrology, it was on archetypal energies. And so the astrology was a footnote. Whereas what we are doing here is more the astrology is the high note. It is what we are really looking at. And it is not something I know a whole lot about. So I am looking for all of you to educate me. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, it's a comment. We're learning from you too. Deborah want to say yes. Oh, sorry. Is that what the hand symbol means? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it means
Okay,
I want
okay. You're up.
yeah, because you had asked earlier if there was something I was, struggling, not struggling, that wasn't your word, but early on, I don't come from either a philosophical or astrology background. I know very little about either, but I have been following planetary things since I was a child because my grandmother taught me. She was very attuned to all that. So earthquakes, volcanoes, when they happen, when certain planets are lined up, the pole of the ocean, all of that, but it ties into your personal psyche too. Because I recently had a reading done with human design. And I don't know if you're familiar with that form of astrology. I don't know if it's a form of astrology and I Ching. But anyways, they suggested I follow my moon, every phase of the moon through the entire month. And that fits more with who my understanding of myself. So anyways, getting back to Cosmos and Psyche, he talked about a great ascent of Leonardo, Columbus, Luther, Bacon, Galileo. And then we began our great descent with Nietzsche, there is no God kind of Picasso, Heidegger. And that I don't understand because I've not read any of those people. You know, it's just not in my wheelhouse as an artist. And, you know, I'm familiar with artists, so Picasso, but can somebody sort of enlighten me? Because I got really lost there. I was like, we're up because of the way the planetary alignment is. No, we're going down. We're on a descent. But all these great things happened when people were on the rise. And now the way the alignment is things are just gradual descent. But what's the next step? I mean, if we've been shown the way, why are we not there doing it instead of whining? You know, like, anyway, that's.
I think I'll open this up to others also. I think one thing he's getting at though is more just like the super confidence of how with the Copernican revolution, there was a sudden like confidence that in the human being's ability to like really understand the laws of nature and to Tarnas sees it as more like just a forging of a confident self. He kind of genders in a way as a masculine gendered confident self going out and kind of understanding everything about the world. And whereas in the later 19th century and into the 20th, it isn't so much that he's connecting this to any planetary, this overall arch. He's not connecting it to any planetary alignment, I wouldn't say, in this particular part. I think he just sees it then as like what is happening is there's a kind of deconstruction that sets in. Like we realize maybe he sees something as having peaked, maybe the overconfident self, and then a kind of deconstruction starts to happen. And then, and as that is happening, little signs are also coming in, what he would call like intimations that there can be a new self that can come through that is more like a new being. One of those intimations is synchronicity, as he sees it, that there's a more meaningful, like the nature of reality has these qualities of meaning that we didn't believe it could possibly have over this period of forging this super confident self. I don't know if I said that well, but I think he's viewing it as a deconstruction, as a prelude to a new thing that's coming through, which he's also seeing signs of in just new forms of
Well, yeah, there is that from the inward turning outward, the letting go of the self, being more material oriented. Yeah, and this is kind of the breakthrough into, like you said, something different, but yeah.
I think his concept of our attitude about our life, that the scientific revolution disenchanted our world for us. It took away the rationalism, took away the magic that earlier humans found in the world, and it's time to re-enchant the world so that we love the physical world and become more aware of the non-physical world. That's my impression of where he's headed and what he's, kind of what he's thinking.
Yeah, I wonder if some of it also could be part of that cycle that you find in astrology that is like the cardinal phase, the succeedent phase, the cadent phase, as it's like the initiating, the maintaining, and the falling away, and kind of self-discovery of how he was saying the ascent was outward, achieving, and then the descent was inward. I don't know. That was just a thought I had.
Yeah.
Astrology, symbology.
Yeah, it is. It's like a breathing universe, really. I think of that spiral of those planets and the changing of the gods. And I think in each phase that we go through, there's both positive and negative. And unfortunately, sometimes, it's a matter of keeping it in balance and then learning, pushing through the dark stuff, the shadow side. But it's also very risky. I remember seeing Rick Tarnas on YouTube. He was giving one of his lectures, and it was when I had first discovered him, and it was, I don't know, I want to say 2017 maybe. I was watching this on YouTube, and I knew a little bit about astrology, and so I knew a little bit about Jung, so I just was so drawn to what he was saying because he was so brilliant, and I was amazed too, because it's like I could finally understand somebody what he was talking about. And this was before this all happened, of course. So he was talking about the planets that they knew were going to be coming in, Pluto and Saturn and Uranus. So that was only a few years away. And what struck me was he clearly seemed disturbed by it. He wasn't going to come out and say anything. Like he said, it's archetypal, it's not predictive necessarily, it's not concrete. It's just this movement, these energies that you see are going to come together. And it was actually kind of frightening, because he was even saying, like, if we survive. So you knew that it was something really critical when those planets were going to be aspecting each other. And then I think in the astrology community, a lot of astrologers were also saying, well, we don't know what it is, but we know it's going to be something big, and then COVID hit and all the crazy politics and wars. And so that's my cheery note for this spring day.
Well, also, Kitty, think about that too, coming from the mineralogical side of things. I mean, if we think of these molten balls of gas and spewing us through this cosmos, they're swirling around us. We're moving, we're following the sun. Who knows what we are heading into, what sort of asteroid. I mean, we have no idea, it's huge. It's just, but it's there. It's, the possibility is there, and yeah.
Right. Science is definitely still trying to figure that out. I mean, I've come across recently some talks about how we could be in a binary star system that's going around Sirius B, so who knows what influences we're heading towards.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I like how Tarnas doesn't deal so much with houses. No offense to people that are really know that. I don't know it at all, but I can really relate to the conjunctions and the squares and the actual physical lining up of these planets. Because I just think of them as these, we're on a molten ball of iron, and the moon affects us every time it goes around. We go around. I mean, everything is pulling on everything else. And now with them all, these planets all lined up, how can these not? We're just so tiny compared to this giant Jupiter planet, just the scale of it alone. Yeah, so I was hoping Tarnas goes into that, as we get on, because I know he talks a lot about using the alignments for us to personally understand our own inner psychology, our own inner spiritual connection, maybe to something greater. I'm not quite sure. I love synchronicity. I get it to happen all the time. It's awesome. Trying to put it into scientific psychoanalytical terms is kind of where it gets confusing to me. So somebody needs to point me in a direction to study that, like what is the archetypical thing of a Jupiter or a Saturn? I don't know any of that.
Oh, he starts to get into that in the next chapter.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so he's going to start to lay that out in the next chapter.
I have an idea. about the ascent and descent topic. And balancing. Sometimes in my personal life, I feel like when really, really good things happen, I feel like something really, really bad's going to happen, you know, to come along and balance it. And I know that's kind of a negative, but it's something I've noticed. And when we look at the world and we see how much advancement there's been, how much wealth and innovation, and at the same time we see this decline, and we see the streets with homeless people and tents and drugs and death and misery. And it's like my whole life I've noticed these two lines just separating like this. And I wonder if that's like some sort of like out of balance thing, you know, like if it was just a little more, I don't know, like bringing the two not so extreme, we could have a more peaceful world. But I don't know if that's something that can be controlled.
Well, I think the thinking of a lot of the thinking that I'm focusing on, and is that something that is both old and now bubbling up again, but it's been bubbling up in Buddhist teaching, is that the way to change the world is to change ourselves first, because we radiate out into the world too. And how we interact with the world and is the most basic way we can change it, is what goes on inside of us. And that of course is back to the personal level, and people are asking questions about the macro level. But you know what, stuff I've been looking at is both. I've been looking at Bernardo Kastrup's work. He's a scientist. He was a CERN scientist, and he's a philosopher. And you know, he talks about how we live, that consciousness does not live within us. We live within consciousness. And if we live within consciousness, everything we think is part of it. And you know, I feel so ignorant. I don't know how to talk about it. I think I'm lost.
Well,
No, you just said it perfectly, because that's kind of my indigenous upbringing was exactly that. We're connected with all. That's why we put down tobacco for the trees. We offer spirit plates with the food we eat to the fire. We bless the water. I mean, we're all connected.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you know, the film Fantastic Fungi, if you haven't seen that, make sure you see that. Read some Bernardo Kastrup. He's got a whole website where he's got courses for free. But you I guess you can get lost in it. Probably a good place to get lost. Oh well, I'm sorry.
Well, it's a good thing to bring up, because I think it certainly, this book goes along with what that person is suggesting, that the consciousness does not reside just within the skull and within the individual person, that somehow the individual person or people are all participating in a kind of consciousness that's collective, or is just out there, something that we're tapping into. How? I don't know, but the evidence that this book brings up suggests that it is possibly the case.
Can I ask a historical question?
Yeah.
Was it the Greeks that first gave archetypical characteristics to the planets based on their gods, right? You know,
I think the whole archetypal thing came out of the classical mythology, I think. I don't know when psychology picked up on that, and probably with Jung. I think it was Jung probably who.
but wasn't this earlier, like in Hellenistic times?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the classical myths, yeah. But I
Yeah.
don't think they called them archetype. I think Plato called it the forms or something.
Mhm.
Now I'm going blank.
That's what intrigues me, is how did somebody know that having a Jupiter and a Pluto in a certain alignment equaled these psychological characteristics? That just like blows my mind, you know? It's like, how did they figure that out?
I mean,
Just
one possibility, not with Pluto, because it would, of course, Pluto is not visible to us today, even with the strongest telescopes. But for the ancients, Jupiter was very visible, and Mars, for example. And it could, one thought is that it's just a long, long generations and generations and generations of people who are watching the sky and just noting Mars and Jupiter come into this place where they're close together, and certain things happen in the sphere of human activity. Some of it can just be experiential. You can just see it. Pluto can't be. And I think that's one of the things that Tarnas does bring up is one of the great things that's maybe helping to bring us this type of astrology in particular forward now is the discovery of the outer planets, which are so consequential, which cannot be seen still to this day with any kind of telescope, at least. But now we know that they're out there, and we know when they've come into these different alignments, and we can now look back in history. And anyways, though, but getting back to the ancients, I think that they could have, part of it could have been, just generations of them viewing the visible planets, the ones out to Saturn. And then one can only speculate about other powers that they might have had to understand meaningful correlations, but they could have at least seen, and maybe they were just drawing these conclusions based on seeing
their own synchronicity of the day.
Right. And we don't know what kind of technology was lost over the years, because looking at any of the ancient structures, clearly something more advanced was creating those structures, in my opinion. So yeah. I feel like something was lost along the way.
What amazes me sometimes too is our own hubris. And when you look back and you think we've advanced so much,
right,
compared to the Egyptians who built the pyramids, and
I feel like we've gone away from that.
Yeah, it seems like we're devolving almost.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, which then makes you wonder about time, like what is the concept of time? Yeah.
Katie?
I think that's the disenchantment that he talks about. Is that we've lost access to this more ephemeral or spiritual aspects of who we really are.
I agree.
He's got a I bought his, that Cosmos and Psyche thing that he and Stan Groff did some years ago. And he does have a handout, Deborah, on archetypal pantheon.
Okay.
And I could, if I had your email, I could send it to you. He's probably going to pop up in the book at some point.
Yeah, I could put it in the chat.
Do you know if the archetypal pantheon, like the characteristics of each of the gods, is in here? Because this outline, that's what I can send it to people.
Yeah, page 88. I think it might be the next chapter.
Yeah, the next chapter goes pretty deep into the archetypes.
Okay.
If you I took a class in classical mythology years ago, which has kind of got the ball rolling for me. because I was reading Jung, and then I happened to be in school. So, and he talked about the Greeks and the classics so much, so I just sort of fell into that. But the class was so good, and I'll have to find the book, and if you're interested, I can send that to the group too. But it's really good because it details all the gods and this huge family tree of gods and how they're related, the gods and how some were with mortals, and they have it's really like a big soap opera, and some of the stories are hysterical. Like, I fell in love with Mercury in that class, and they told a story about how when he was a little baby, he stole Apollo's cattle, and Apollo went after him in a rage, and he picked this baby up and he was shaking him or something like that. And Mercury was supposed to be, he's real clever. And he broke wind, and Apollo set him down right away and let him go. But the story of the day, they're really brought to life. I think if you actually read the mythology, some of the stories about the gods and goddesses. And I always love that movie Clash of the Titans, which I know is very Hollywood, but it's just kind of fun. But it gives you a
Totally, I
sense of,
remember that movie from my childhood. I love that movie.
yeah, it's really fun. But it also kind of, it gives you some insights into the characteristics that are built into astrology and archetypal astrology too. When he's talking about
I would like that too. If you could send that, I would love to read
yeah,
that book.
right now I don't remember the name of the author, but it's really a good book. And I like the fact that it really lists in detail. There's so many gods and goddesses, but the primary ones, of course, but it's amazing how they're interrelated too. And their stories are, it's just like a good dragnet story or something. Yeah, I'll send the information to Tim if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, to me personally, or just like on the group page, you mean?
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sorry, I got a typo on mine. Spell check comes through. It's like, what?
Do we want to look at the overview thing one more time, or just take the conversation to a new
Yeah, let's
place?
do.
Yeah.
And you're going to post that on the Facebook page?
Yeah. Yeah.
We did.
Tim, your notes are so much more organized than mine. Mine are like scribbles all over the page.
Oh, mine always start that way too. My notebooks are terrible. Then I just organize them.
Well, it looks like this calls for a deeper conversation about synchronicity.
Yeah.
It was a big part of the chapter.
Yeah.
Well, Jung has a whole booklet on synchronicity as well. And I think that's the one where he talks about the where he started to study the natal charts of different married couples. Or maybe, yeah, I think that was the book. I think it was called On Synchronicity by Carl Jung. I'll list that one too.
There was a section on page 56 that I reread a few times. It just kind of popped out at me as it's where he says, Jung saw nature and one's surrounding environment as the living matrix of potential synchronistic meaning that could illuminate the human sphere. He attended to sudden or unusual movements or appearances of animals, flocks of birds, wind, storms, and sudden louder lapping of the lake outside his window of his consulting room, and similar phenomena as possessing possible symbolic relevance for the parallel unfolding of the interior psychological realities. And after I read that I was getting. Am I there? Did I go away? Someone was trying to call me. Anyways, after I read that that section right there, it really was meaningful to me. And then I went and put a YouTube video on of a podcaster that I listened to, and he is a Russian scientist, and he's struggling with the the situation in Ukraine. And he actually went outside of his realm of intellectual podcast subject matter and interviewed a raccoon he saw on a walk. And so it really struck me because I just read that about paying attention to your surrounding, the animals, and then here this person, almost immediately I saw him interviewing a raccoon in his state of overwhelm of the world, of what's going on, you know? So I thought that was neat.
I'm trying to think of remember the lyrics to Rocky Raccoon now.
You want me to look them up?
No, that's right. I'm just going off on a tangent. You never know. Actually, sometimes that's so bizarre. When I've had lots of dreams, I was trying to keep a dream journal over the years too. And those also can be so intense and so confusing. I mean, now you really almost need a psychiatrist or a Jungian to truly interpret them, I guess, but it's also very personal and only you can decipher some of the meaning, I guess. But what I found very helpful is when I would jot down even just a word or whatever the object was or the feeling in the dream, and I would actually take a dictionary and literally look up words. And it was amazing how it would really give you a much fuller meaning, or it would get into some of the longer definitions would get into the origin of the words, and all of a sudden a light bulb would go off and I'm like, oh, that's what it means, you know?
Right.
So maybe Rocky Raccoon
And I
had
think
something
sometimes
going
when you,
there. Sorry.
when you have the, these things happen, I feel like they kind of like exponential when you're paying attention, then you start to, and that, you know, it builds on itself. Yeah.
You become like a psychic detective.
I mean,
I noticed that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one thing and then I'll turn it over. But yeah, take, for example, Jung's example of the stopped watch. And I know I read it the first time and I thought, oh, that's interesting. The first time I read the book. And then I saw what Tarnas pulled from that. And it's just like one thing after another after another. So many layers of these Saturn qualities that he was able to see in just that one moment, and which Jung saw probably also. So he's taking it from Jung. But yeah, Leona?
This might be like maybe childish. I don't know. When I just started learning astrology, I kept seeing angel numbers. If you see this number repeating, look it up and you'll see why. Look up the meaning. And I find it kind of accurate sometimes. And it's a little interesting to me.
I just took a 2-hour class yesterday from a numerologist, a local numerologist. So I'm sort of amazed at that too. And then she's also doing a class on symbology in about another month or so. I'd like to take that too, but everything seems to just connect somehow down the line, you know.
Maybe I'll bring up the thing at some point in this chapter. Tarnas notes how while synchronicity gave the human mind, a human being, the sense that there could be a more meaningful reality, it was still kind of within the interior self, and it couldn't be verified in the world. Like the world, well, it could seem to suggest that the world had meaning, but it was still kind of seen as, it could be easily dismissed as something just internal. And so he's guiding us toward astrology as being the form of synchronicity on a grand scale that we're somehow now noticing. I might have lost my train of thought here, but I know from synchronicity, which could be easy to dismiss if one is not open to this possibility. And it could be seen as just an internal projection or an internal, but he takes synchronicity and then it's kind of the breadcrumb path to the patternings of the planets and then human life. And I don't know where I was going with this, but I just felt he seemed to be drawing that connection. Synchronicity is sort of like the door, the little humble door that leads us to the bigger world of the astrological patterns.
That was one of the notes I took. having a character of a spiritual awakening that the individual was himself or herself, not only embedded in a larger group of meaning and purpose, but also in a sense, a focus of it. That was a quote from Tarnas. And a belief that synchronistic occurrences move the psyche from a problematic one-sidedness towards greater wholeness and individuation. You know, synchronicity appears to serve a definite purpose. It seems to compensate the conscious attitude. It seems to represent more than mere chance coincidence. And that's the thing I love about it. Like I'm redoing parts of my kitchen and I'm tearing apart one cabinet and I needed another cabinet. And I just had an intuitive belief that if I went to this store, a resale shop, there would the cabinet be. And it was. I called up a friend to help me in case I trusted it would be there, and it was there. It was just amazing.
I wrote down that quote too. That quote was meaningful to me too, that passage.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
If I could also read one more quote, again, tying back to the synchronicity leading into astrology. This is from the first page where he actually mentions the word astrology, which is page 61. And Tarnas says, first talking about synchronicity, yet the problem has remained ambiguous, for although coincidences are often personally significant, they tend to resist objective assessment. Only if such phenomena were in some sense public and pervasive rather than private and exceptional, only if the archetypal patternings were more universally discernible and associated widely with collective experience in the world at large, rather than sporadically with isolated special cases, could the suggestion of a deeper order be effectively substantiated in a way that could influence the cultural worldview. Just that sense of, even though synchronicities can seem to be personally profound and one can have a personal sense that they have meaning, they seem to be isolated, random, and not connected with a pattern that has any seeming coherence, at least to a more skeptical person.
Mm-hmm.
It's all too much woo-woo for a lot of people. You know?
Well, and you have to pay attention, right?
Right. And if you could experience it collectively, which maybe we have and we don't realize it, I don't know, then it would be more people might be open-minded about looking at things that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to do analysis too, and a lot of hindsight, and you know, weird things like, I live in Mariposa and my mother grew up on Mariposa Avenue in Watsonville, Santa Cruz, you know, and a lot of things unfolded in Mariposa that affected the whole entire family. And so it's looking at little things like that and knowing that it means something. Personally, I think so.
Yeah. Pia?
Yes. My father had a saying that touches me to this day, that the Lord writes straight lines with a crooked hand. And I've always loved that. It's like a squiggle. And when you look back, you can see the connection of the dots. When I moved into this house 16 years ago, I was in the midst of a terrible, terrible divorce. And I was walking up the street in November. And I said, and my father had just passed away. And I said, Dad, I really need help. I really need help. My name is Oso Rio, Bear River. The house that I found, which is the house that I live in now with my children, is on Bear Creek. It is under Bear Mountain. It is on Bear Mountain Drive. I believe all of that is synchronistic. When I walked into this house in November, there was only one picture on the wall because it had been staged, you know, for sale. And it was a potter that my father favored, that he collected artifacts from, pottery from. Volkos, nobody knows who Peter Volkos is, especially in Colorado, because he was from upper New York State. Anyway, those are synchronicities that I cannot dismiss. I cannot dismiss them.
Mm.
That's all. I mean,
Pia, I know who Peter Volkos is. I've met him.
okay,
Oh,
well,
wow.
it was
Now
the
there's a
only picture
synchronicity.
in the house, and
See?
you know, I just think that whole thing, Bear Mountain, Bear Creek, my name, Bear Mountain, Peter Volkos, and me asking my very recently deceased father for help is not an accident.
Mm-mm.
And many people would say, woo woo, you
Mhm.
know, oh, you're reading too much into it.
Yeah,
Right.
and some people would say, so what? And it's like,
It was extremely meaningful for me.
yeah,
And I think if I had met Jung, if I had had that privilege, he would have said, damn straight.
for sure.
Well, I'll tell you damn straight.
No?
Really, I really believe that.
Yeah. Anyway, it just sort of bubbled up. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you just had a synchronicity here. How would you know that in telling that story, there would be a woman listening to it that had met the person who you just said didn't know him? That's a synchronistic you know,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. Because he's not a well-known potter. So hallelujah, Katie.
Well, he was very well known among studio potters, and he ate at a restaurant where I used to eat in Berkeley too. So
He was a wild man.
He was.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't think that there are accidents. I think there are synchronicities. And I think that if you're not awake to them, then they just sort of pass you by. And if you have the, I don't know what to call it,
Awareness.
the taste for them, you see them everywhere.
Mhm.
If you have the taste for them.
I think you have to be open to the universe
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah, definitely receptive. Mhm.
Thank
You
you.
know, I'd like to hear what Norma sounds like. I have no idea what Norma's voice sounds like, and I've been sitting here for over an hour, hadn't heard a thing.
Sorry, I'm not very fluent, and I try to understand what you all are saying. And regarding what Pia said just now, I was looking at one of the pages, and here it says that there are important factors to develop a capacity for thinking and perceiving symbolically, a cultivated sensitivity to metaphoric and analogical patterns. That's very difficult to me. Yes, that's why when I tried to look the different patterns Tim was talking about, it's not as easy as that, because I remember I did the training with Stan, and the last time he came to Argentina was in 2018, and we had our dinner together with all the group, and we were talking about our Saturn Pluto positions in our charts. And soon after, Stan had a surgery, and I had a very difficult time through 2019 and 2020, because my 3 vertebrae weren't broken. And I don't know if I can do holotropic breathwork groups like before. So it's somehow difficult to understand those patterns. As for me, I suppose, and it's very interesting to understand the conscious and unconscious development each of us has. And well, I didn't expect that situation. I thought I was going to change my environment according to Saturn possibilities, but I have Saturn in 12, and I just have to remain in bed for 2 years. So really, I'm not so evolved as I would have expected.
Oh, well, thank you for telling us. Oh, goodness.
Well, but I'm okay.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, I continue to make up my mind what are the messages from the gods.
Have you kind of been thinking about Saturn then very much over this period and come to
Well, you
some
know, I have Saturn, Sun, Pluto.
Saturn what Pluto?
Saturn, Sun in the
Oh,
middle,
like
and
all,
Pluto. So I hope something is, I'm in a turning point.
well, maybe this is the time when I look at the clock and say, we've been talking for a while, over an hour. We can keep going. There's really no end time that we have to commit to. Is there anything else that someone wants to talk about from the chapter that we didn't get to yet?
I'm gonna have to reread it. I had to power through it today, but there's a lot of stuff that went right over my head.
Hmm.
Well, it's not exactly light reading anyway. It is one of those
No.
things you do have to read over and over until you have an aha moment or something, you know.
hmm
He's really fascinating to watch when he's speaking too. You can see he's like in his own little intellectual world almost sometimes. He's just amazing, you know. And I don't know how he can keep track of he's just so articulate. I'm just very impressed. You know how we're all making comments and things, but you kind of lose your train of thought. Well, he always seems to stay on target. I just think it's amazing.
He's really refined it over time somehow, and he's just gifted with it.
Yeah.
It was also very interesting to me to read the previous book, The Passion of the Western Mind, that gives you a big scope of what is developing in this one.
Yeah, what do you think, for anyone who's not read it, what do you think are some big things that you would say you'd like people to know from that book?
I don't know, the whole book, because everything is interesting. It has to do with, I think some of you have been talking about how of all the beginning of the world and the different stages. And here, when they talk about the quest, the first line. The history of a culture, the inner history of a civilization can sometimes bear suggestive resemblances to the unfolding of an individual human life. And when he mentions the stages regarding Campbell, separation, descent, and transformation, reading The Passion of the Western Mind, it was a great help to understand those different stages in the big scope and personally, how we are. For example, nowadays with Ukraine and Russia, if we look at the chart of both nations and both countries and the people that are involved, it will be, we can see the connection between the different actions. I mean, for example, Biden chart, Putin's chart, Russia chart. But it's very hard to understand the symbolic and the attitude of those persons now leading, and so many people that have to die.
What were those three phases? Separation, descent, and
Sorry?
what was the 3 phases? Separation,
Descent and transformation.
transformation.
The hero journey isn't on the page, I don't know, 43, the inner quest.
Yeah, which correlates to a lot of astrological cycles as well.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, if you come from the conjunction to the first square, and then the opposition, the ending square, and now the next conjunction. But if we bear in mind that those cycles may be 500 years, wow.
Right,
So
like it's like
it's
an
hard to
overlapping.
understand.
Yeah, it can be like an overlapping of that same template, of that same cycle, little ones, individual ones, big ones, country, everything's overlapping and moving at the same time on that cycle.
That's right. And for example, nowadays we are having 3, 4, 5 cycles that are at the same time
Coming together, yeah.
yeah.
I'm tempted to pull my copy of Passion of the Western Mind over and read a little bit of it as well right now. But the epilogue, I think it's called the epilogue, is also very beautiful in that book. And that's the first time in that book where he really brings himself, his own perspective, sort of into it in a way. He presents his own story a little bit more here in Cosmos and Psyche. He's talking about my journey and when I first discovered astrology and that type of thing. But in Passion of the Western Mind, he manages to not really, I think, bring himself into it until the epilogue. And then he comes back to this idea of the hero's journey then, and notes particularly how throughout the course of this evolution, it's been, I'll summarize it and also make it just kind of coarse and kind of crude and simple. But he says that it's been basically a masculine journey, one where, from Plato and Aristotle through Augustine and et cetera. And he feels that what we're called to do now is to recognize this, to realize the shadow of what this journey has been, and to integrate with what he considers a new principle, sort of the feminine in a kind of new marriage of not totally losing this solar self, but this self needs to be integrated with something new. It needs to find itself again in a deeper understanding of itself. Yeah, so I read Passion first, not knowing, I thought the ending was beautiful, but I didn't know what he was, I didn't know like that he had another thing in mind. I didn't know what he had in mind when he wrote Passion. In other words, I didn't know that this astrological study was underneath this whole process. He was studying the astrology from the mid-70s onward and wrote Passion during the entire 1980s. So it really informed that book, but he kept it hidden basically in that book. It doesn't come up at all, at least as far as he doesn't show his hand in any way. Although the epilogue, he brings in this personal perspective and suggests or intimates something more is coming.
I think there are both books that we have to reread several times.
It's my understanding too that was really, oops. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. The way I understand it too is that was kind of his strategy all along when he was writing The Passion of the Western Mind. He knew that he wanted to move into astrology, but he also knew it would be dismissed immediately. So it was kind of a long-term endeavor on his part. And I also think I read somewhere that The Passion of the Western Mind has become a standard texts in universities because it was so brilliant. And then when Cosmos and Psyche came out, some people were criticizing him, more the classical academics, I guess, you know, and he knew that would happen, but he really did lay the groundwork. And well, I guess like Copernicus and all the others too, you take your chances, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've listened to a lot of interviews with physicists, and they always get to this point where they're talking about like the possibility of some sort of like programming or how things, you know, and they won't ever go towards astrology. But it's like as if they would only, you know, dabble with that, they might start to integrate some of these problems that they can't solve. It's fascinating.
Should we close it up here or bring it home with something else? Or
Yeah, I don't have a joke for you. Sorry.
we ended last time with jokes. Well, not a joke, but so this is in all seriousness. I think next week, I think I'm not going to be able to participate because of a work thing. We're still going to have the group discussion. Possibly my wife would be here to host, or if anyone wants to now or later in the week, just volunteer to co-host. It's pretty easy. It's just going to be like letting people in from the waiting room. That's about it. Facilitating conversation if you feel you want to try that in some way. And I can still record it. But I might not be here next week. I'm gonna, I think, have to miss that one. I'll still be reading along with everyone and commenting in some way, but I probably will miss the conversation. So no pressure now, but if anyone wanted to be a co-host next week, it's a very simple thing. And shall we all embark on chapter 3 now? It's going to be an exciting chapter. We finally get deep into the astrology now.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'll miss next week. I'll be at work as well, but I'll definitely keep up with the reading and reread the other chapters too.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for everything you shared today. That was some profound stuff.
And
Yeah.
then
Thank you.
are you putting the recording on Facebook as well if people want to review?
Yeah, I've
Our
been
meetings?
I've been uploading it to a YouTube page, and then I just share the link.
Oh, yes, that's right. Okay.
So they're all living on this YouTube page.
That's great. That's very
Yeah.
helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah,
you.
that's
Thank
great.
you.
Well,
Thank you,
thanks.
Tim,
Thanks.
and thanks to all the group. It was
Yeah.
really wonderful.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks for everybody for participating.
Yeah.
I can't be here next week either, so
Well,
Just-
Well,
Well, maybe some
hopefully
others from
after, yeah.
previous meetings too. Maybe with the change in time of the group, others couldn't make it today too. Or
yeah.
you said you had international people too, right?
There's some people
A few.
they've said like don't necessarily make changes at the time on my behalf, but we have some people in Europe.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll make it for later talks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. All right. I'll see you in
Okay.
2 weeks, but have a great
Bye.
conversation.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy Astrology Day.
Bye.
Bye.
Equinox.
Okay.
Yes.